Welcome to Fantastic Vision. Please subscribe us before you watch today's video. If you always watch our channel, you may know that the latest news about Buffett bought the shares of TSMC. Recently, the news that Warren Buffett spent a lot of money to buy TSMC shares spread like wildfire, and once became a hot headline. Because of Buffett's halo, many people think that the future of TSMC seems to be worth looking forward to, but now, we have to pour cold water instead, because according to media reports, TSMC has ushered in the biggest bad news, which may end the glorious era of TSMC. If we want to talk about the glorious era of TSMC, then we have to talk about when did its glorious era begin. There is an obvious symbolic event, that is, the Apple A9 incident. Samsung and TSMC were given to OEM. In fact, Apple's previous chips were mainly manufactured by Samsung. When Apple could not develop its own chips, it still directly purchased Samsung's Orion chips. At that time, Samsung used a 14nm process, while TSMC used a 16nm process. Although TSMC's process was slightly behind, Apple handed over some chips to TSMC in order to increase its bargaining power. As a result, Samsung's Apple's chip leakage rate is too high, resulting in the performance is not as good as TSMC's 16nm chip production. Since then, Apple has handed over all orders to TSMC, which directly led to the rise of TSMC. About a quarter comes from Apple's. The Apple A9 incident caused a chain reaction, and many giants of microchip also chose TSMC to manufacture, allowing TSMC to snatch a lot of orders from Samsung. Therefore, we can see that the glorious era of TSMC is due to the huge shipments. TSMC has previously stated that 60% of its revenue comes from US companies, but now, the bad news comes from these MIC giants. I believe everyone also knows that the giant on mobile phone chips is Qualcomm, and Qualcomm has stated that chip orders after the 3nm process will not be contracted by TSMC, but Samsung and other foundries. Joint production, Samsung we understand very well, and the other foundries here are likely to include Intel. In fact, before the glorious era of TSMC, Intel has been brilliant. In recent years, after the new CEO of Intel took office, the focus is develop chip foundry business. In order to concentrate on developing the foundry business, Intel even opened up the x86 architecture license and made the foundry business independent. It acquired Toyota Semiconductor, the 9th largest chip foundry in the world, and actively deployed chip foundries in Europe. A batch of EUV lithography machines arrived in European factories. In addition to Qualcomm, there is also Apple, the largest customer of TSMC, none of them. Apple CEO Cook has also announced that Apple's chip orders will also be produced in Europe in the future. As we mentioned above, Intel has begun to deploy European factories. The engraving machine is already in place, so the production in Europe that Cook said is most likely to be Intel, because apart from Intel, it is difficult for other chip foundries in Europe to produce chips for it. Regardless of who produces chips for Apple in Europe, it will definitely not be TSMC. On the one hand, TSMC does not have a factory in Europe, taken away by competitors. Until 2024, Apple will use the 3 nanometers process, and there is still a distinction. The regular version of the iPhone 16 will use the first generation 3 nanometers process, and the Pro version will use the second generation 3 nanometers process. The subsequent iPhone 17 and iPhone 18 are expected to be it adopts the third generation and fourth generation 3 nanometer, fifth generation 3 nanometer, and first generation 2 nanometer processes. In fact, just a while ago, Intel, which also planned to adopt TSMC's 3 nanometers process, suddenly cancelled the order, but the impact on TSMC is more than that. Since Apple did not adopt the 3 nanometers process, Qualcomm and MediaTek will naturally follow Apple. After all, the cost of 4 nanometers is much lower than that of 3 nanometers, and the use of 4 nanometers can obtain higher profits, which is the result of losing competition. Therefore, analysts pointed out that Maxic is unreliable. Although TSMC's Maxic customers provide TSMC with more revenue, this is based on the premise of competitors, which ensures that TSMC's most advanced technology can always be very fast. It has long been profitable for TSMC, rather than the production line has been idle or downgraded to produce 4 nanometers, or even 5 nanometers chips. Perhaps affected by this, TSMC has begun to reduce the production capacity of the 3 nanometers production line. It is expected that this year's capital expenditure will be reduced by $8 billion. The level of 2021, that is to say, TSMC's expansion path, has not only stopped, but is still declining rapidly. In fact, Intel announced some time ago that it has received orders from the world's 7 major chip giants, 5 of which are among the top 10 customers of TSMC. CEOs from all over the world attended the event. In the end, the US subsidy plan was implemented, but it turned out that the amount of subsidy Intel received was 3 to 4 times that of TSMC. There is no doubt that the best result for TSMC to build a factory in the United States is not to lose money, but Intel can compete with TSMC on price. Therefore, the more factories TSMC has in the United States, the less competitive TSMC will be. In fact, looking back at history, we can see that there are almost no chip foundries in the United States. Although GF now has 3 factories in the United States, GF was AMD's ProSun before, mainly producing chips for AMD. Later, GF gave up the 7 nanometers process, so AMD embraced TSMC, and GF had to transform, but despite this, GF has 10 factories around the world, 70% of which are not in the United States. For chip foundries to maintain their market competitiveness, they must maintain high investment in R&D to ensure technological leadership. TSMC's R&D investment in 2021 has accounted for 20% of its net profit, up to about 28 billion yuan. So it is difficult to make a profit, even if the gross profit margin is not high enough. It will be difficult to support the continuation of research and development, which will eventually lead to its own decline. This is also the main reason why many chip foundries have given up research and development of 7 nanometers and below processes. Chip manufacturing is a standard technology-intensive and capital-intensive industry. The chip factory in China is an investment of nearly 100 billion yuan. Just imagine what will happen if Zhong Zhongmo said that building a factory in the United States basically does not make money. Apple and Qualcomm made such statements almost at the same time. We believe that just like in the past, it will also cause a series of chain reactions. As the saying goes, water can carry a boat and also capsize it. Therefore, the glorious era of TSMC may end. Thank you for your watching. How do you feel about this video? Please write down your view on the comment.